interesting. Someone else had a question?
And I think that's just sort of a practical question from the standpoint of the translator rather than the publishing industry part of it. If you can talk a little about how you became interested in Sayed in particular and like how you started translating his works, and then more generally, if you have sort of an approach to how you decide which works to translate. Like, are you just constantly reading books coming out in Spanish? And
I'm constantly reading.
Just like yell, Steve, translate this, or like, is there a rhyme or reason to it? I feel like the Spanish in particular just has an enormous amount of literature being created all the time. It's like kind of overwhelming. So I'm just wondering how you sort through that.
Can I also add something to that? And also, did you propose this book to the publisher or
No, just the opposite.
Good.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm going to segue between your question and Steve, is that one of the things that to go from the publishing industry onwards and to connect to your thing, is there frequently publishers, especially nonprofits, especially people who are doing literature and translation, especially people who are doing very literary books, are looking for things that are fundable because the marketplace isn't robust. You might have a book that does sell enough to pay for all its costs essentially and break even, but that's not a given by any means. So frequently people, if you have choices as a publisher, sometimes you look for the books that have like funding for them. Bulgarian literature has some funding, it actually doesn't, I'm lying. German literature has lots of funding, Latvian literature has lots of funding. So you can actually like get translation grants, that can play a role in like why certain things get selected at times. This book has no funding at all. So we just really liked it. So Steve, you
I'll start with Sayre. Was I started reading Sayre a while ago, and I was familiar with his work, but I'd never read the book that Chad was looking for a translator for until I started talking to him about the project. And the same way that you become familiar with anything, just sort of it's on. Other writers mention this person, and you just sort of take down the note. But in terms of Spanish or Latin American literature generally, it's not like reading all the time or anything like that. It just, in my particular case, I just followed a path, from writer to writer to writer to writer, and ended up on certain things. There's no rhyme or reason to it, really. It's just like, there's this person, this is interesting in this particular case, and a lot of it happens totally by accident. And I think there are a lot of people who are more practical than that and say, oh, there's money for this from this country this year, let me do a book. And I think that's legitimate. That's a good way to go about it. This project was just more accidental in that case.
Is all the humor culturally bound?
The humor in this book, or is all humor generally culturally bound?
I mean, when you go to translate it, I mean, it's been my experience in talking with folks who speak English as a second language, and I tell jokes, and I get the sense that I just farted in a crowded room.
That's what happens during my class.
Yeah, a lot of humor is bound up in colloquialism and idiom, and in misunderstanding. And so if you're coming from a position of where misunderstanding is the default, it might be more difficult to pick up things. Especially because the misunderstanding parts tend to be subtle. That question is so it's not like I pause because it's so close to so much of what I do every single day, trying to rewrite jokes and then realizing like I didn't really get the joke. Just feeling like a jerk. It's really frustrating, and so there's a lot of rewriting of humor. And a lot of the humor in this book is really grounded in historical situation, and so I just had to say,
Like in Washington, Noriega, being one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also like part of the language in here, sort of like the way that things are described and kind of builds, and it's sort of funny and in a like joke way, but like in a, I don't know, it's tough. Another time that comes up, that comes up in terms of like trying to translate things and the difficulty related to humor is with puns and wordplay. It's like a huge topic and is incredibly difficult to deal with, because like a good example is this book, Three Trapped Tigers by Guillermo Cabrera Infante, that Suzanne Levine translated, and things loaded. Like there's not two sentences that go by that don't have some sort of wordplay or some sort of pun or some sort of game that's going on. And I have no idea how she pulled that off, but she basically had to like almost rewrite the book into English, because none of that stuff could become, it was not one-to-one by any means. Like you couldn't make those puns in English. You had to come with a totally different idea.
Cabrera and her rewrote that book together.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and he's super funny, and he knew English pretty well, so he's able to help do that. But I think it's a completely different book essentially, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot of English like misunderstanding of translation. Like that's part of one of the themes of the novel, and so there's a lot to play with there. So you can like go back and forth between the languages. But it's a very loaded situation when you have a joke about the culturally dominant language basically stealing your national identity. That joke doesn't translate so easily back into English.
Unless you're an Indian.
What's that?
Unless you're an American Indian.
It's a different cultural situation, obviously.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
I was just going to ask, was the 65 Years of Washington supposed to be comedic? Because I didn't, except for the part where the mathematician didn't want to get his pants dirty, I didn't pick up on it.
It's not like a gut buster. It's not intended that way. It's written from the perspective of someone who was part of this world, and a lot of the characters are preening, effete, self-important intellectuals.
That makes sense.
And it's
ironic the way I guess the prose it's very formal, even though it's meandering. It's also he like the narrator talks about a lot of very abstract concepts. But at the same time, the story is about these two just average guys. So I guess there was sort of a disparity there.
There's a good example of the sort of humor in that sort of characterization is like when the mathematician wants to meet that poet, has the whole list of all of the what is like the ABCs.
Versification points. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's like this whole theory, and he's all obsessed with meeting him for drinks, and he goes to the bar and waits, and the guy doesn't show up, and the whole that kind of like self-important. And there's a specific sort of character, a specific sort of weird humor, and that sort of ties into what you're saying about it doesn't exactly translate in a way. I mean, it's culturally bound in a sense, but maybe not. I mean, it's like making fun of
it's not. I mean, it's funny in the way that like a Kids in the Hall sketch is funny. You don't laugh at it. You laugh at yourself, at the things it shows you about yourself, and a lot of that feeling is very bitter, and. Maybe I'm it's just my reading of it, but you don't laugh at the situation. It's not the situation itself isn't humorous, but what's sardonic and bitterly humorous for the reader is what they recognize of themselves in these preening, hyper-intellectual people who are getting drunk and having sex with each other while their country's in shambles and falling apart.
Okay, yeah, I didn't pick up on the fact that Argentina at this time was so unstable, and there was a contrast between that and the characters. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I guess the stuff I was talking about before about contextualizing then. I mean, now you know.
Good job with that. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll end there. And you should just read the book and find if it's humorous or not on your own.